What does it mean when I have a headache already and I haven't even started talking? All right, so we got some main topics to talk about today. RAM Crisis 2.0. This is actually the second time we've seen this. If you guys have been following news for any length of time, then you would know that this is the second time we've seen SK Hynix, Micron, and Samsung be accused of price fixing and monopolistic behavior and intentionally reducing output to increase the demand and increase the pricing. The first time around, we saw major fines in the hundreds of millions of dollars and sentences into prison time for some of these leaders. So maybe we can keep our fingers crossed. It'll happen again. I don't think anyone would cry about seeing any of these execs hauled off to prison. And our second major story is going to be Sony ending physical games by 2028. We'll talk about what that means. It kind of ties back into a couple weeks ago when we talked about licensing agreements and whether or not you actually own the game. Believe it or not, Sony is a distributor. They also don't own the game. So it's kind of a domino effect. We'll talk about what the potential fallout from that could be. And then, of course, we've got a lot of other rapid stories to talk about. So get your favorite cold one, warm one, blaze, I don't care, do whatever you want, sit back, relax. We got a lot to talk about today, and it's gonna get a little dicey. So let's just go ahead and get right to it. So the return of the DRAM cartel. Actually, it's not even really the return. Look, if there's anything we've learned about watching movies about cartels, right? I'm gonna say movies because I don't know anything about the cartels in real life, but you chop the head off, a new one grows. It's kind of an amazing trick, right? But anyway, the DRAM cartel continues, if you will. This is totally repeating itself, allegedly. It's important that we use the A word here because right now, as of June 25th, a new California class action lawsuit accuses Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron, the three companies that control roughly 90% of the DRAM market globally, of coordinating production cuts while providing capacity towards AI-focused HBM memory. Now, the plaintiffs allege this artificially restricted consumer DRAM supply and contributed to prices rising by more than 700% since 2022. Now, these are allegations. It has to be proven in court. But the cool thing is at least somebody is paying attention to this. And I think there was even a comment in the last week's video when I talked about the DRAM pricing and someone was like, yeah, but you need someone to actually look into this and nobody cares. Well, it was like right after that earnings call from Micron, like literally the next day is when this lawsuit was filed. And the cool thing is, these earning calls are almost like admissions of guilt sometimes because they talk about their strategies to the investors and everyone's listening, including the Department of Justice. So, you know, here we are in California now with a lawsuit that is now kind of hoping to dig into this to whether or not, you know, this is something that is legal in terms of the level of pricing that they're putting out there. Now, the previous DRAM drama back in the early 2000s, the industry was caught with one of the biggest price-fixing scandals in tech history. Now, in March of this year, Steve put out a great video called The DRAM Cartel, and it covers a lot of the history, including the early 2000s, and about how we're kind of going full circle on this again. It's almost like these execs forgot. You know, you're not immune. I know there's a tech oligarchy kind of taking place, but guess what? You're not immune to this. So anyway, so the too long didn't read version of the early 2000s scandal was that Samsung pleaded guilty, SK Hynix pleaded guilty, and multiple executives served prison time, and hundreds of millions of dollars of fines were issued. Now here's the thing, hundreds of millions of dollars of fines right now would still be quite impactful on all of these DRAM companies when it comes to their bottom line, especially when it comes to their investors. Because when hundreds of millions of dollars go to fines, guess who doesn't get any of that money? The investors. So it's going to be a really interesting story to see how this one plays out. Now, this isn't a random comparison. This is literally the same industry with the exact same companies allegedly doing exactly the same thing. The difference is the demand is higher than it's ever been, than it was back in the early 2000s. As that was post-dot-com boom, but the rise of the personal PC, online hosting, websites and such, that was growing massively then. So data center build-outs and such was happening then as well. And we're just seeing this happen now in a undeniably larger scale, right? Now here's the question, are they doing it again? And this lawsuit is intending to find out. Now the important thing here is that with this new class action, these are only allegations. But what makes these impossible to ignore is the fact that the industry has already been convicted of doing something very similar before. Now the only thing that could have possibly have any impact on this would be if laws have changed. And no, guess what? Price fixing and market manipulation laws haven't changed. If anything, they've gotten a little tighter since the early 2000s. So keep your eyes peeled, because this is going to be one of those Michael Jackson popping popcorn moments, because I don't think any of us are going to shed a tear for any of these execs that might lose their entire livelihoods and do prison time because of the decisions that they're making. Now, here's the irony. South Korea, where these companies are headquartered, are doubling down, where their governments are actually getting involved in helping subsidize a lot of their costs to build more fabs. So it's kind of getting crazy here. So while this is happening, South Korea announced $520 billion in long-term public-private initiatives centered on Samsung and SK hynix to expand semiconductor manufacturing, including new fabs and HBM production facilities with a strong government backing. So here in the US, this is not the same thing, because they're not manufactured here in the US, but they're doing business here in the US, obviously. And that is the part where the US government can get involved, is in market manipulation. The way that it's being looked at in South Korea is because that's where they're being manufactured. It is in the country and government's best interest to always be able to meet the demand. And if the demand is growing, grow to meet larger demand. So for them, they want to be involved in helping these companies be able to scale and expand faster. The irony is, if we talk about the Micron story last week, Micron, with those SCAs, or those strategic customer agreements, being upfront payments, were supposed to also be payments that are to help source funds to build those fabs. Now, Micron is a US-based company, whereas SK hynix and Samsung are overseas. So Micron isn't getting the quote-unquote government assistance, at least that we know of right now. There is the CHIPS Act, which is, they absolutely are getting money, but maybe not to the scale that South Korea's government is providing SK hynix and Samsung. But the fabs here in the US are a lot harder, a lot more red tape for them to pop up versus like what they could do in South Korea. So it'll be really interesting to see how this one plays out. Now, in the end, it's not really about RAM. Okay, it's about who controls the future of computing. And right now, that is the RAM companies. And the RAM companies have never had really this level of control of an entire industry. In fact, they have a level of control over industries outside of their industry, because DRAM and the silicon and the NAND is used in so many different industries. Cell phones are being affected. Game consoles are being affected. Obviously, personal PCs and data centers are being affected. We know people that do digital hosting for websites and stuff. They've had to increase the cost of their own website hosting, because if they need to expand a rack, like if they need to build out more racks, they are paying the same crazy inflated 700+% prices as everyone else. So they are not just affecting a single industry, they are affecting an entire global economy. So that's why it's important that this get looked at. So it's not just memory. Anyway, memory is even more valuable, and it's not because of gamers. Now, whether the lawsuit succeeds or not, the memory industry has become one of the most strategically important industries in the world. And when something is that valuable, history has a funny way of repeating itself. Sony sunsets physical games. Now look, I know a lot of you may be on the younger side. You're like, what the hell is a physical game? Football? Soccer? Tennis? No, the actual disc. Those aren't coasters. You know, they're not coasters you put down on your table to protect a water ring. Those are what the movies and the games used to come on. Before that, it was a tape that actually had to, anyway, I digress. Really dating myself here. I actually had a Betamax. Okay, I really digress. This week in an official blog post, Sony announced that beginning January of 2028, every new PlayStation title will be digital only. That means no discs, no physical copies, no used games, and no collector's edition with playable media. Now, you could still get the collector's edition, which comes with a physical statue or a medallion or whatever the hell it might be. There won't be a disc in there, right? And that's going to be a really weird thing for a lot of us older folks. And I think a lot of younger people probably don't even, there's a reason why these are sitting right here. You know why they're sitting right here? Because they're relics. They're relics. And you know how many people have actually reached out to me asking to buy those? No. Fuck no, those are mine. I earned those through the gray hair, okay? Anyway, I digress. Sony says, this reflects consumer buying habits, and with digital sales now overwhelmingly dominating physical. Now, we are talking about the outrage that we're hearing right now, like a lot of people that are super pissed and all the memes going around. It is a minority group, but it is a very loud minority group. In 2025, Senior Director and Video Game Industry Advisor at Circanium, Matt Piscatella, reported spending on physical video game software in the US has been cut by more than half since 2021 and is now more than 85% below its peak in 2008. Now that makes sense. In 2008, everyone relied on physical copies, hell, even PC games, because our internet was not great back then. We were still talking like DSL was like one of the best that you could get at the time. Like you could potentially get maybe a 1 gig or no, back up, a 1 meg or maybe a 5 meg internet. But in 2008, the internet infrastructure in the US is way behind everywhere else in the world, and it kind of still is. Anyway, generally, Sony says 80% of their game sales are digital. And that's really not that surprising because we've seen PCs go digital when it comes to games, obviously with Steam and GOG and all of the other downloadable platforms, right? Xbox pushes Game Pass, Nintendo introduced game key cards, which is funny, it's literally a physical card with a key on it to download the game on the Switch. But Sony is simply the first console manufacturer to officially sunset physical copies of anything. Now, here's the crazy part, though. The irony here is that Sony also made a strong argument against digital because of the licensing that takes place between Sony Digital Entertainment and then the studios that make the movies. See, let's rewind here for a second. We talked a couple weeks ago and you guys got really mad at me, and that's fine. We're allowed to have opinions and they're allowed to differ, okay? Licensing for you, by the time you've licensed something, it has been licensed multiple times along the way. You see, you have a movie that's made. You got a company that has written the movie, and then they hire the crew and they hire the film company, the labor unions, whatever, to make the movie. Then that movie has to be sold to something. That something is sold to, I don't know what. That's why if you ever watch the beginning of the movie, you're like, a so-and-so film brought to you by a such and such association in accordance with blah, 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 right? That's why you see all these things. These are all the companies that got involved to make this movie. They need a way to distribute that movie. And back in the day, the distribution was they printed a disc and they sent it off to Circuit City, Best Buy, CompUSA, Walmart, wherever, right? And then the customer walks in and goes, this looks like a good movie, and walks to the register, and that's how it was distributed. Now we're talking digital distribution. And Sony Entertainment, Universal Pictures, Warner Brothers, all of them also licensed that movie from the studio that made the movie. So it's been licensed, there's a license agreement there. And then when you get the movie from Sony, Warner Brothers, Universal, you have a license agreement there. You could still have a license agreement that's good here. But this agreement with the studio and the actual film company that made the movie, that can expire before your agreement expires with the distributor. That's how Sony just removed 551 movies because their license agreement with Studio Canal, which is one of the main licensors of digital movie content with big distribution platforms, expired. So 551 movies removed from your library that you paid for. So this is where the outrage and the argument comes from. Like, wait a minute, I bought this movie. I want to watch this movie. Why is it no longer in my digital library anymore? This is something that's actually been going on for a long time. We're going to go back to Blu-ray content. Before Blu-ray was out, there was digital, like DVD, right? Digital video disc, and then Blu-ray discs. But with Blu-ray, there was a little buying incentive to, hey, if you buy this physical copy, you also get this Violet key. If you have no idea what Violet is, it's probably because you're too young. Violet was one of the early movie distribution platforms where you could take your physical copy, put this key into Violet with an account that you've created, and now you have a digital version that you could watch this movie on. Here's the problem with that. That also expired. It was not a movie that you had access to forever in the digital platform. I can't tell you how many movies from my Violet account have disappeared over the years. But what's crazy about that is the fact that you go to Target or Walmart and you go to the digital movie section, which is very small these days. Do you remember the bargain bin? You remember going into the checkout line at Best Buy and there was always like a metal bin in the checkout that just had like $5 movies? A lot of the times these movies had those digital download keys as well. But you know how many of them were expired before you ever even bought it because of the age that's transpired? It wasn't a license that started from the moment you activated it. It was a license that started from the moment it was packaged. So there were so many movies that I bought in the bargain bin that I never even got to do the digital download with it because the digital download key was expired before I even bought the movie. So that's where the nuances of licensing comes in, and it's really, really crazy here. Sony talked about the dangers of digital only because of that, only to now say they're going digital only when it comes to games, which is essentially the same thing as a movie. So it's really ironic what Sony is doing here. Now, the crazy part is the fallout effect that this is going to have. Now, look, I am not telling you to feel bad for GameStop. We all know GameStop are just thieves when it comes to their trade-in values, right? But let me tell you, if you're not the kind of person that's trying to go and sell things to GameStop, walking in there and buying a secondhand game for a third of what the game initially cost. You don't care about the additional download stuff you got, right? You buy a game and there's like, hey, go on to the store and use this key and get this skin or whatever. You don't care about that. You just want the game. GameStop was great for console gamers. Some PC games, okay, maybe somewhat. But console gamers lived off GameStop for decades because they could get games a lot cheaper. You get the game home, it's scratched, it doesn't work. You go to GameStop, they just swap it out for another disc. It works. Hey, hallelujah, you're up and running because it wasn't DRM'd to an account. This kills that. So don't feel bad for GameStop because again, GameStop, like I said, we're just downright legal thieves with offering you what, $16 for an Xbox 360 console, and then they would turn around and sell it for $150. That's just highway robbery. But the used game market is essentially got an expiration date now because of that. So it's one of those things where it's like we talk about stop killing games. It is just going full circle right now. Now, here's the crazy thing here. Stop Killing Games isn't really about physical media. And a few weeks ago, we talked about California's Protect Our Games Act and the steps it needs to go through to become law. And currently, they are in the Senate committee hearings. Now, there's been some changes since we talked about Stop Killing Games and Protect Our Games Act a few weeks ago, because we talked about it was in that argument stage where proponents and opponents of the bill get to argue their side. There's been a few changes here. Now, during that hearing, the ESA argued that private servers for discontinued online games raise legal and intellectual property concerns. And after criticism, it clarified and softened parts of those comments. But the exchange highlighted a larger philosophical divide over who controls a game after it is sold. So it's heating up. Let's just put it that way. We are seeing what appeared to be like these amazing instant gratification access to content, movies, games, other digital things. I'm going to talk about Fusion 360 in a minute. That really triggered me this week. And I know Phil's going to laugh over there because I showed it to him and it's absolutely fucking bonkers. What seemed like great convenience, all of these were licenses that had dates. And we are now reaching the end of those dates. And now we are seeing everything just get tossed upside down because we don't know where things are going to land. It's the same thing happens on streaming platforms too. Let's say you're like, okay, I'm not even consuming digital, like I'm not buying digital copies. I'm not going on Prime Video and saying I want to spend $17 to download this movie. I'm just going on to my favorite streaming service and watching a TV show. Have you ever been mid-series on a show that just suddenly is gone? You're like, where the hell did it go? It's not even here anymore. It's not on Netflix anymore. Oh, it's on Paramount Plus. I don't have a Paramount Plus subscription. That's because those different TV shows are constantly moving around too, to where the best dollar for them is going to be. So it's extremely frustrating to see the way that the digital landscape looks like these days. Quick Fusion 360 discussion here. I've been teaching myself Fusion 360 and I've got a long form video coming out where I take you through the entire journey of me going from raw material and a lot of screw ups to an actual physically working, aesthetically pleasing CPU block that I designed from the ground up with no help whatsoever. Just me taking apart blocks, looking at how they're built and trying to design my own. I didn't watch anyone else's videos that's done this. People were like, did you watch Linus's video on what not to do? No, I didn't, because I did not want to be influenced by anyone else's content. I wanted to make it myself. Fusion 360 it's a very expensive software. It is a professional 3D CAD, G-code manufacturing, PCB design. You can design PCBs on it. It is a professional manufacturing tool. Yes, there's SolidWorks and a lot of other things. Just pick your favorite flavor. There's a really neat function built into the manufacturing side of Fusion called debur. That sounds like a very nice thing to have, right? Rough edges, getting deburred, just doing a clean pass on every sharp edge on the thing that you make. When I clicked it, it said, debur is a part of the manufacturing DLC. Please upgrade your subscription for debur. I'm like, oh my God, I've already paid like $1,000 for this software for this year. And now I gotta pay more for what seems like the most obviously necessary part of manufacturing? They recognize that and they're charging more for it. So it's like the DLC annoyance in games has now followed me into a whole new hobby that I'm in. Anyway, Microsoft's taken a totally different approach to this, at least for now. According to reports, Xbox is testing a system that would allow, and this is kind of cool, that would allow players to convert eligible physical Xbox One and Xbox Series X games into permanent digital licenses tied to their account. Basically like what I just said, how Violet used to work, but it's like a game version of that. If you already have the physical version of the game, and it's not a DRM, you can DRM it to yourself, which is kind of neat. And the question is now for Xbox going through massive layoffs, how are they going to execute that? So it'll be really interesting to see if they actually do it and are able to do it. But if it's true, it would be fascinating compromise, because instead of pretending physical media never existed, Microsoft may be trying to preserve ownership while still moving toward an all-digital future. It lines up with reports that their next hardware, referred to as Project Helix, could be an all-digital as well. Now, I want to talk about an example of digital games moving and disappearing from libraries and such. The way Steam does it is if you own a game in your library that licensing ends with whatever publisher and Steam no longer is able to sell it, it doesn't disappear from your library. There are titles in my library, like for instance, The Movies, which is essentially like Sims, but you're building a movie studio and you're actually making movies with your Sims and stuff. That disappeared like 20 years ago from downloadable from Steam, but I can still play it. I can still download it. If I don't have it on my machine, I can still download it. It is part of a repository and an archive that I can still download it, because Steam makes sure that you still have access to that game even though licensing may have disappeared. Another case in point, there's a game that I was playing called Driver San Francisco. Kind of cheesy, kind of small. It was actually by Ubisoft. It was from a big title, or from a big distributor and developer. But it was a fun game, and Phil was watching me play it, and he thought, oh, that looks like fun. I want to play it. And he went on Steam, and he couldn't find it. It's not on the store anymore. But I still have access to it because I already owned it. And that's the way it should be done. If you already own the game, then you should still be able to play it. The problem is that game's really old and doesn't ping any servers for DRM or activation or anything like that. It's just, hey, you've got it. It's a single player game only. A lot of modern games now, because of DRM, want to immediately ping some sort of server, and if that server no longer exists anymore, then the game is DOA. That's why a lot of developers don't actually want to distribute their games on GOG, because GOG doesn't do DRM. So that's why you've got, obviously Steam, and you've got Epic and Uplay and all that stuff because of DRM. So it's just ugly and nuanced. But this is where most gamers are left with their thoughts right now, is when you spend $80 on a digital game, do you own it or are you borrowing it? The reality is right now you're borrowing it. That's the way it is. But there are obviously like Stop Killing Games and then Protect Our Games and other movements that are happening that are designed to make it so if you spend the money on it, you own it. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's the way it should be. This is just an example of when tech moves faster than the infrastructure designed to support it. All right, time for rapid fire news. We're going to go and talk about here the US PC shipments dropped 7%. As the market isn't expected to bounce back until 2029. And price hikes and component shortages take hold as PC market declines, the Omdia report suggests. So this comes to us via Tom's Hardware. It says US PC shipments sell 7% year over year since Q1 2026 versus 2025. And here's the thing, now we're in Q3 2026. These numbers are going to look even worse as you compare what the second and third quarters are going to look like this year. Anyway, it's the steepest decline since 2023. Now, the biggest hit is obviously the budget market. So back in just a few years ago, you could easily build a $500 or $600 gaming PC that was actually pretty good, right? It would be able to play the modern titles. There was no problems with that whatsoever. The problem is PCs under $500 dropped by 19%. I'll be surprised. That number's a little lower than I thought it would be, because it's not entirely possible to build a PC for $500 anymore, let alone the under 500 segment. So I think that number is going to probably be up in the above 50% drop if we factor in Q2 and Q3 of this year. Analysts expect the average PC price to exceed $1,000 this year for the first time ever. By the way, the average price of a PC, and that's obviously because of just memory and storage. The two smallest things you put in your PC have the biggest price. It's kind of crazy right here. So Dell, believe it or not, though, was the first major OEM to actually grow market share during this downturn. It's kind of crazy. But this is exactly what we've been talking about for months, right? People aren't buying fewer PCs because they're not interested in PC anymore. They're just simply being priced out. And that's why, tying back to the beginning of this news video about the investigation into price fixing from SK Hynix, Micron, and Samsung, who also control not just RAM but storage pricing. We need to see some real involvement there. Intel's only CPU that people were actually interested in just got a $50 price hike. Yeah, we're talking about the Core Ultra Plus series. Remember the 270K and the 250K, which people actually were recommending because you got a bump in core count and you got a slight reduction in price? Yeah, it's a CPU that Intel was starting to kind of get a little bit of people excited for. Hey, you know what? Intel's actually got some pretty good price to performance ratio here. And then guess what? 270K Plus goes from $299 to $349. And 250K increased from $199 to $229, so a $30 price there. It's almost like NVIDIA or Intel looked and went, you know what? People will pay whatever the hell price we put on there because of AI, so we might as well. So it's almost like Intel's now following AMD's suit of never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity, and they're doubling down on that. So way to go, Intel. Anyway, this is the first time in a while Intel actually had a CPU people were recommending because the price to performance ratio made sense, and now they decide to raise prices. And like I said, it just feels like consumers will pay whatever the hell the price tag they want to put on there. And that's obviously not true because we're seeing the adoption and sales of PCs decline. So obviously people aren't willing to pay whatever you put on there. All right, so we got former Call of Duty frontman launches a new studio with stop killing game style mission statement. If the game bombs, it goes open source. This one, I've got not a hot take, I've got a serious question on that. So let's talk about what this is first. Former Call of Duty creative strategist Robert Bowling, formerly of Infinity Ward and later co-founder of Midnight Society, has launched a new independent studio called 18 Bravo. Now the studio's mission statement includes a bold promise. If one of its games fails commercially, it will open source the game rather than let it disappear. Bowling says the goal is to ensure that even unsuccessful games can live through the community instead of being shut down and forgotten. The announcement comes just days after the heated Stop Killing Games debate where preservation and game ownership become major industry talking points. And no game has been announced yet, but the studio name 18 Bravo and Bowling's background suggests it's likely working on a military shooter. Now, given the fact he comes from Infinity Ward and Call of Duty, that's kind of a no-brainer right there. Now, I actually love this philosophy, but not every game deserves to become a live service forever. But if a studio is willing to say, if we can't make money on it anymore, we'll let the community take over, and that's a pretty consumer-friendly stance. And we always talk about preserving games, and this is someone actually building that into the business model. Here is my concern. Let's just say they make a game, and it bombs, and they open source it. Someone else takes that code, modifies it slightly, makes a successful game that is wildly profitable, and starts selling it. What is 18 Bravo going to do then? Is 18 Bravo going to come after that studio and say, hey, we get royalties on that because you took our open source code? Or does the moment you make it open source remove you having any legal attachment to anything that happens to it after the fact? Everything we've talked about in this news article, this news video today, has started with what seemed like good intentions where no one ever thought about the tail end of that era. So the same thing could happen here. It could sound like a great thing that could absolutely backfire dramatically if that question isn't answered up front. So think about that, right? Put yourself in 18 Bravo's shoes. You spend a lot of money developing a game. It costs a lot of resources and money to develop a game. Millions and millions of dollars, okay? If you're now have taken a loss, and you've written that off and you're now in the red and you're trying to work on your next potential thing that you're hoping will not only be successful, but be successful enough to pull you out of the red into the black for your previous failure. And someone takes your previous failure and makes it successful off of your hard work. Are you going to let that go? I don't think people will. That's my concern with that. So it sounds great and all, but I think it has some potential legal repercussions later if this isn't really thought through. Another thing I want to talk about here, right now in that Protect Our Games Act, there was actually a statement made by one of the legislatures that wildly suggested Minecraft servers, private servers, is piracy. Could you imagine? Minecraft is still the most popular game on the planet. Could you imagine if private servers were deemed piracy in order to shut down through a bill that was intended to protect games? The crazy part is Minecraft provides the server code. Minecraft says, build your servers, modify it, turn it into a true sandbox, do whatever you want with it. And then some suit says, that's piracy. Buckle up. It's gonna get wild. You know who else should have buckled up? dbrand. dbrand is a perfect example of why you can't simply steal IP, profit on it, and then play victim when you are told to cease and desist your project. I'm obviously talking about the company's companion cube. If you know what companion cube is, it's a Portal element. It's from the game Portal, the little cube thing. And they basically made an enclosure that kind of goes like right over your Steam box. So it looks like the Portal cube. Now the problem is that is Valve-owned IP. dbrand decided to take the design cues of that, model it one-to-one, like exactly as it looks in the game, to make a injection molded cover for your Steam machine, and then sell it. It was their second most popular product they've ever made. They say they spent millions designing it. Then Valve sees it and sends them a cease and desist. dbrand reached out to Valve after the cease and desist and said, hey, can we get permission? And Valve said, no, not at all. Now, it's also alleged that Valve would have been willing to partner with them had they been approached first. But this is an example of why you can't simply steal IP, profit on it, and then now if you read their post, it's very, oh, poor us. I don't like dbrand at all, by the way, and I'll talk about why in a second. But dbrand goes, oh, poor us. We put all this money into it. You put all this money into stealing something that people recognize, which would have been the whole reason for buying it. The reason anyone would have wanted the companion cube is because they recognize it from a highly popular game that Valve put out on a Valve product. So no, I've seen comments too on Twitter where people were like, this makes me hate Valve. So that's like you saying you hate a company protecting their IP. You can't just go around stealing whatever design that you want because you like it and make money on it and expect nothing to happen. Now, the reason why I don't feel bad for dbrand, if you're not even aware of what this company is, basically prints money by putting skins on phones and tablets and laptops and whatever else. It is stickers, okay? They have made millions of dollars creating stickers. I have also seen over the years how dbrand goes after other skin companies claiming stolen intellectual property, stolen designs, stolen blueprints. Now here's the thing. If you're gonna make it fit an iPhone, there's one iPhone design for this, like let's say we're talking about the iPhone 17 Pro. There's only one way you can make a skin to fit that. It's gonna fit the shape. The shapes are identical, but I've seen dbrand go after other companies and try and either shut them down or just try to siphon sales away from them, claiming other companies are just copies of what they do. Now, what dbrand does do is they will do a lot of R&D on the type of material that they use, the type of vinyl, or just the quality of the sticker, right? The adhesive that's used so it doesn't peel up over time, it doesn't fade over time, it doesn't lift, things like that. dbrand does spend a lot of R&D on, but to claim that stickers on a product is a copyrighted thing doesn't give me any sympathy for them in this instance because they blatantly stole IP. So, although it's cool, I kind of wish they had just gone through the proper channels, but the problem is that means they would have had to have licensed it back to license. This is like the licensing episode, but they would have to have licensed the IP from Valve to make that product, which means some of that money would have gone to Valve, and I think dbrand just didn't want to do that. Now, the extra insult to injury here is the fact that dbrand was automatically sending out those companion cube sleeves, whatever you want to call it. It's like a shell, right? Plastic shell. So a lot of the reviewers that had the Steam machine had that to show with it. Now, I feel bad for some of the reviewers because they were talking about it and touting and be like, you can buy this from dbrand. I'm sure none of them looked into whether or not dbrand had permission to make that. I mean, that's one of the first questions I think I would have asked is like, wow, is this an actual Valve product? And if they came back with well, no, then I would be like, I'm not showing this shit. But yeah, I don't feel bad for dbrand. It comes down to just theft of intellectual property. There's just no way around it. That's it for this week. I was going to do a Steam Machine roundup. I don't think y'all need me to round up all of the mediocre reviews on it. Obviously, we did our long form video where I showed you for the same price as a 2 terabyte non-controller, although ours is only a 1 terabyte drive, I built a machine that is able to just destroy the Steam Machine in a console form factor. It's about the size of a PS5 in vertical format. And so many people were excited for that video, and a lot of people said they're actually going to copy that build because it fits all of the criteria. Living room friendly, matches into the decor. It doesn't look all gaudy. It's very small form factor. It's roughly the same price if you were looking at a larger capacity drive. The only downside is you can't turn it on and off with the controller, but you can still use the controller for everything else. But if you guys want to check out that video, check the link below. We'll put a link to that. It's actually pretty popular, and I'm excited for that because although SFF builds are not cheap, clearly people are interested. Micro Center has been selling out of SFF product, which shows there's clearly interest there. So, all right, guys, thanks for watching. If you've got any interesting things you think we should talk about in the news, make sure you tip us off. You can email us at, I guess, rtfm@jace2cents.com, even though this isn't the RTFM show anymore. But guys, thanks for watching. Buckle up. Like I said, this was the licensing edition, and right now it's the Spider-Man meme of everyone pointing at each other, but what they're pointing at is who owes each other money. All right, guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one. You know, my headache's worse.